What does the Bible tell us about inheritance? That is, the passing on of one's property or possessions to one's children. While the Bible doesn't prescriptively or by command tell Christians what we're supposed to do with our property as it concerns our children, there are several accounts in texts, as well as Proverbs, that give us insight into how the God of the Bible views inheritance. So let's take a look. Starting with the text from Proverbs, I'll begin by reading the New World Translation, and then for comparison purposes, I will use my translation of the Hebrew and Greek texts, since I'm actively translating the book of Proverbs at this time. Proverbs 13:22 says, "One who is good will leave an inheritance to sons of sons, and the wealth of the sinner is something treasured up for the righteous one." So it says a good person would leave an inheritance to sons of sons, even grandchildren, and that the wicked one's or sinner's wealth is treasured up for a righteous one, meaning that even though a wicked person or a sinner, one who doesn't just sin because we've inherited sin, but who actively chooses to sin or is a criminal, they may accumulate wealth, but it's only for the purpose. The only reason the God of the Bible allows it is to be passed on to someone else. And so in a sense, similar to actual inheritance from a righteous or good person, but with a different motivation. My translation of Proverbs 13:22 in the Hebrew text, "A good person will cause sons of sons to possess an inheritance, but for the righteous one the wealth of the sinner is kept safe." It's very similar, although mine has a little more active sense. In the first part, will cause sons of sons to possess an inheritance versus will leave an inheritance. My translation of the Greek text is, "A good man will inherit sons of sons." So different from the Hebrew text in that the inheritance is sons and grandchildren versus a good person leaving an inheritance to sons and grandchildren. But wealth belonging to wicked people is being kept safe for righteous people. Very similar to the Hebrew text in the second part. Proverbs 17:2, New World Translation, "A servant that is showing insight will rule over the son who is acting shamefully. And in and among the brothers he will have a share of the inheritance," showing that a servant who's not an actual member of the family, but who acts with insight, will be given priority over a son who is a member of the family, but who acts shamefully when it comes to dividing up the inheritance. My translation of Proverbs 17:2, "A servant showing understanding will rule by a son who is being put to shame. And in the midst of brothers he will share the property." So the servant who shows understanding, in my translation, rules by the son or is alongside the son in the household who's being put to shame. And because the servant shows understanding and the son by whom the servant is ruling is put to shame, it's the servant who will have a share of the property when it comes to an inheritance. My translation of the Greek text of Proverbs 17:2, "A thoughtful servant will prevail over foolish masters, but among brothers he will divide a share." So you could take masters as the equivalent of the son in the Hebrew text sense, since it's the sons oftentimes in the household who are the masters of the servant. And in that sense, if a thoughtful servant prevails over a foolish master or son, then among the brothers he will divide a share, similar to the second part of the Hebrew text. Proverbs 19:14, New World Translation, "The inheritance from fathers is a house and wealth." Very specific here, at least in terms of the house, right? Like is often done today in many cultures and communities where parents have a home that they leave to their children, as well as wealth. But then it says, "A discreet wife is from Jehovah." My translation of Proverbs 19:14, "A house and wealth are the inheritance from fathers, but a woman or a wife showing special understanding is from Jehovah." Greek translation of Proverbs 19:14, "Fathers divide up house and property to children, but when a woman is joined to a man, it is from God." So here again we see the very specific sense in which an inheritance is referred to as a house and property, when it comes to material things. But when it comes to a human, in this case a woman, and a man, the woman is something given by Jehovah. Very special gift to that man. And so even though at times men and women who are brought together, who come together, don't stay together, just like with Adam and Eve, whom Jehovah brought together, it's not because God didn't do his part. It's because one or both of the two that were brought together failed in some way. But when it comes to an inheritance, fathers, Proverbs 19:14 says, or mothers, depending on who owns the property, but in this case it's from the perspective of the father, it's a house and property that go to the children. Proverbs 20:21, an inheritance is being got by greed at first, but its own future will not be blessed. Speaking in the sense of those who look to inheritance with a covetousness eye, an eye of covetousness. They want the property so bad, they more so care about the inheritance than they do the parents that they're inheriting the property from. We see a lot of that today. Children at times even kill their parents to get the inheritance, to get what's in the will for them. That kind of inheritance will not be blessed in the future. My translation of Proverbs 20:21, Hebrew text, an inheritance or property, wealth, obtained too quickly in the beginning, even it will not be blessed at the end. Now, as you'll see when my translation of Proverbs is published, there are times in the Greek text when the text does not line up directly with the Hebrew text. So in this case, you might see when you read my published translation of Proverbs, the Greek text reference to Proverbs 20:21 equaling Proverbs 20 verse 9 part 2. And so you would then go to the Greek text or translation of it in my Proverbs 20 verse 9, and you'll see that there's a first part that's not numbered after verse 9 that corresponds to the Hebrew text of Proverbs 20 verse 9. But then you'll get 3, in this case, additional renderings that are potentially a part of the original text of Proverbs, but that differ from the Masoretic text. But in this case, the second rendering of the additional part of Proverbs 20 verse 9 corresponds to the Hebrew text of Proverbs 20:21. This is why I had to spend a lot of time, and I'm still working on my translation of Proverbs, because there's a lot of things that need to be worked out in order to do it right. So, number 2 of the additional parts of Proverbs 20 verse 9, corresponding to the Hebrew text of Proverbs 20:21, a portion received too quickly at the start, in the end, will not be blessed. So, it shouldn't be gotten by greed or too quickly in inheritance, because property, wealth, a house, these things can affect people in negative ways if they're not received in the right order at the right time as part of an inheritance. Now let's take a look at Deuteronomy 21:15. These are a series of texts that often come up where it pertains to the meaning of firstborn in relation to Jesus as God's firstborn, not in a figurative sense, but in a literal sense. And so it tells us in Deuteronomy 21:15, in case a man comes to have 2 wives, the one loved and the other hated, and they, the loved one and the hated one, have borne sons to him, and the firstborn son has come to be of the hated one, it must also occur that in the day that he gives an inheritance to his sons, what he happens to have, he will not be allowed to constitute the son of the loved one, his firstborn, at the expense of the hated one's son, the firstborn. So as you can see here very clearly, and as I explained in my video, does the Bible prohibit polygamy? It clearly does not, and there are many instances where men in the Bible have more than one wife or woman. Although in the New Testament that is prohibited for overseers or deacons, there are texts that actually outline a man having more than one wife, even though as Christians we don't practice polygamy in countries or places where it's not legal. But where it is legal, if a Christian man has more than one wife, he's not allowed to consider the firstborn son of the wife he loves more as the actual firstborn, unless that one is actually the first one born. if the firstborn is of the wife who is loved less or hated, that's still the firstborn, because it was the first one born. And then the next verse states, for he should recognize as the firstborn the hated one's son by giving him 2 parts in everything he is found to have, because that one is the beginning of his generative power, or the beginning of his children in the Greek. The right of the firstborn's position belongs to him. And this is where Trinitarians often get confused, because they like to mistakenly interpret firstborn for Jesus as meaning just position rather than the one who's firstborn, because the position goes to the one who's actually firstborn, unless it's used figuratively, like it is 3 times of the 130 some times it's used in the Bible. The position goes with being born first. It's not just a position. That's something that comes with being born first. That's not the meaning of firstborn. The meaning of firstborn is right here. Beginning of one's generative power, or children in the Greek text. And the one who's actually born first, as the firstborn, receives 2 parts of everything he is found to have. That is the one who's the father of the firstborn. So this gives some insight into the priority or position, the double portion that the firstborn would receive, at least in the Old Testament. And again, as Christians, we're not bound by the Old Testament laws in the same way that the Hebrews were, but the laws are still good. There's nothing wrong with those laws. They actually are for the protection of people, even though most don't like some of the laws today. That's just because they fail to recognize their moral quality and what they really have to say. And in this case, it shows the God-Jaw's view of the firstborn as it pertains to the double portion of his property when the man has more than one child by more than one wife. Numbers 26:52, after that, Jehovah spoke to Moses, saying, to these the land should be apportioned for an inheritance by the number of the names. According to the great number, you should increase one's inheritance, and according to the fewness, you should reduce one's inheritance. It's kind of like what Jesus says, to the one who has, more will be given to him. To the one who does not have, the one who has less, even what he has will be taken from him. So there's a sense in which if you have more, you're to be given more, because you're doing more. That's why you have more. And so it makes sense that you're to be given more, because you're going to do more with it. Whereas the one with fewer, the inheritance is less, because there's less to give it to. And it's likely that less will be produced out of the fewer. Each one's inheritance should be given in proportion to his registered ones. Only by the lot should the land be apportioned. According to the names of the tribes of their fathers, they should get an inheritance. By the determination of the lot, one's inheritance should be apportioned between the many and the few. And then it goes on to give the names of the registered ones of the Levites by their families. And then it goes on to talk about the ones registered by Moses and Eleazar the priest when they registered the sons of Israel in the desert plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. And then it talks about how among these there did not prove to be a man of those registered by Moses and Aaron the priest when they registered the sons of Israel in the wilderness by Sinai, or of Sinai. For Jehovah had said concerning them, they will die without fail in the wilderness. So there was not left of them a man except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. Then the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, and the son of Machir, and Manasseh, the families of Manasseh, these other individuals, it goes on to names, it says, came near, and these were the names of his daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, and Milcah, and Tirzah. And they proceeded to stand before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the chieftains and all the assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, our father has died in the wilderness, and yet he did not prove to be among the assembly, that is, those who ranged themselves against Jehovah in the assembly of Korah. But for his own sin he has died, and he did not get to have any sons. Why should the name of our father," these are the daughters talking, right before Moses, "why should the name of our father be taken away from the midst of his family because he had no son? Oh, give us possession in the midst of our father's brothers." At that Moses presented their case before Jehovah. Jehovah then said to Moses, "The daughters of Zelophehad are speaking right. By all means you should give them possession of an inheritance in the midst of their father's brothers, and you must cause their father's inheritance to pass to them." So here you have in a situation where during a time it was mostly the men and the sons who were given priority, the daughters felt comfortable and confident enough to speak up before Moses and to address their situation regarding their father and themselves and the fact that they had no brothers. And then Moses took that right to Jehovah, who accepted what the daughters had said, and then went on to command Moses that their father's inheritance should pass to them, right? Not to the father's brothers or to some other man. Even goes on to say, "In the sons of Israel, to the sons of Israel you should speak, saying, in case any man should die without having his son, you must then cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter." So by speaking up here, these daughters helped establish part of the laws that were given to Israel when it came to inheritance, and how if a man dies without having a son, the inheritance should pass to his daughters. Now again, we're not bound by these laws today, but this gives us some insight into how the God Jah dealt with things in the past. During a time when the men were, I don't want to say more important, but more significant in terms of the protection of the entire nation, and were looked at more so than the women when it came to establishing the seed through which the family line would come. But the daughters were by no means insignificant, and nor are they today. And that's why they spoke up in this way. And he goes on to say, if he has no daughter, then you must give his inheritance to his brothers. Right? So the daughters take priority over the brothers of the man who dies with no sons. And if he has no brothers, you must give his inheritance to his father's brothers. So even over their grandfathers, their uncles basically, right, the daughters would take priority unless the man had sons. And if his father has no brothers, you must then give his inheritance to his blood relation who is closest to him of his family, and he must take possession of it, and it must serve as a statute by judicial decision for the sons of Israel, just as Jehovah has commanded Moses. Now let's take a look at Numbers 33:53. And you must take possession of the land and dwell in it, because to you I shall certainly give the land to take possession of it. And you must apportion the land to yourselves as a possession by lot, according to your families. To the populous ones you should increase his inheritance, and to the sparse one you should reduce his inheritance. To where the lot will come out for him, there it will become his. By the tribes of your fathers you should provide yourselves with landed property. It's very similar to what we read earlier when it came to those having much and those having less. And you notice the use of lots in these accounts that are part of the determination of what's to take place. So whether or not you want to use lots today, if it comes to that, to help determine how to apportion your property, there's at least some biblical precedent for doing so in these accounts. Judges 11:1 and 2. Now Jephthah the Gileadite had become mighty, a valiant man, and he was the son of a prostitute woman. And Gilead came to be the father of Jephthah. And Gilead's wife kept bearing sons to him. When the sons of the wife got big, they proceeded to drive Jephthah out and say to him, "You must have no inheritance in the household of our father, for you are the son of another woman." So again, it shows the importance of, at least in some of these accounts, the purity of the family, and in what instances certain sons might see other sons as not as deserving of property. Whether or not that's the case is something you'll have to determine, right? Because we read earlier that even if a man has two wives, two women, even if it's one that's loved less or hated, whoever is firstborn received a double portion. But there may be a case where the firstborn is of the loved woman, and you have children by other women and the loved woman, And you're going to need to come up with a way to determine how to divide your property. Some of the children may not be as accepting of your decision because of situations like this. So these are accounts that you might consider if you have a similar situation with multiple children by different women, and you're still looking for a standard by which to pass on your property. Right? You can use lots. You can use the status of the firstborn. You can determine based on the behavior of the son or the daughter. Right? Even servants of your house, even people who help around you, might receive a portion versus an actual son or daughter if that son or daughter acts shamefully, according to the text from Proverbs that we reviewed. 1 Chronicles 28:8. And now, before the eyes of all Israel, Jehovah's congregation, and the ears of our God, take care and search for all the commandments of Jehovah your God, in order that you may possess the good land and may certainly pass it on as an inheritance to your sons after you to time indefinite. So again, just highlighting the biblical precedent for passing on your possessions, your land even, to your sons after you. Job 42:15, and no women were found as pretty as Job's daughters in all the land, and their father proceeded to give them an inheritance in among their brothers. Right, so even going beyond the account we read in Numbers, where it talked about the daughters who had no son, speaking before Moses and then Moses going before Jehovah so that the inheritance would be passed on to them. Even here in the book of Job, where there are sons, because Job had more sons after the devil took away his first children, and he also had these beautiful daughters. The daughters were given an inheritance right in among the sons. So there's biblical precedent, not just for giving priority to the sons, but to the daughters and the sons together. Ezekiel 46:16 through 18. This is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah has said. In case the chieftain should give a gift to each one of his sons as an inheritance, it itself will become the property of his sons themselves. It is their possession by inheritance. And in case he should give a gift from his inheritance to one of his servants, it must also become his until the year of liberty. And it must return to the chieftain. Only his inheritance, as regards his sons, is what should continue to belong to their own selves. And the chieftain should not take any of the inheritance of the people so as to force them out of their possession. From his own possession he should give his sons an inheritance, to the end that my people may not be scattered each one from his possession. So there's some indication here about how servants are viewed differently from actual children. Although, as we read previously in Proverbs, if the actual children, act shamefully, it could be the servant who's given priority over the child. Nevertheless, in normal cases where your children are not acting shamefully or being put to shame, they would be given priority in terms of the inheritance. And it's so that things belonging to you and your family don't scatter your children in ways that are not in accordance with the will of the one who brought all families together in the first place. Possessions, material wealth, they help preserve your family. And if they're not protected and if they're not left with the family, then the family can be disunified more easily. Although, as we read earlier as well, greed over possessions can do that too. Luke 12:13, it's an account involving Jesus. It says, Then a certain one of the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Jesus said to him, Man, who appointed me judge or apportioner over you persons? Verse 15, Then he said to him, Keep your eyes open. This is Jesus talking. And guard against every sort of covetousness. Because even when a person has an abundance, his life does not result from the things he possesses. Your life didn't come from that. All the things that you have around you did not produce you. You know who produced you? Your parents. And you know who produced them? Their parents. All the way back to our first parents, and we know who produced them. Jehovah. Life comes from life. It doesn't come from things that are not alive. like possessions, material things. So why would we in life prioritize things that aren't living over the source of our life? That's what should take priority. In other words, what Jesus is telling the person here is, you should be more concerned about your parents or your brother as a living person, as part of your family, than worrying about whether or not unliving things, material things, are being divided up fairly. It doesn't mean we don't want to have a fair division of property, but it does mean that we shouldn't allow property or material possessions to take priority over life, because our life does not come from possessions. Hebrews 12:14 through 17, pursue peace with all people, and the sanctification without which no man will see the Lord. Carefully watching that no one may be deprived of the undeserved kindness of God, that no poisonous root may spring up and cause trouble, and that many may not be defiled by it, that there may be no fornicator, a practicer of abusive sexual practices, nor anyone not appreciating sacred things, like Esau, who in exchange for one meal gave away his rights as firstborn. For you know that afterward also, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For although he earnestly sought a change of mind with tears, he found no place for it. Esau was not appreciative of his right as firstborn. It is important, our relationship to our parents, the right of firstborn, that's not unimportant when it comes to the inheritance we receive from our parents. It's just not more important than taking care of our parents or getting along with our siblings. Inheritance and property and things should never get in the way of what is more important, and that is life. And Esau gave away his right for something that wasn't his life. He just was overdramatic about it and viewed the need for food more so than he should have at that time. And he gave away too quickly his right of firstborn. So it should not be treated without respect or something not sacred. But we should give priority to life. And how do we do that? By pursuing peace with all people, right? Without which the sanctification, without which no man will see the Lord, right? So if we should be peaceable with all people as we look after our rights as part of a family or as firstborn. Let's look at our last text, Colossians 3:23 through 24. Whatever you are doing, work at it whole-souled as to Jehovah and not to men, or whole-souled as to the Lord. Sometimes the New World Translation uses the divine name in text where it doesn't have quotation authority or even Old Testament text reference authority. So I don't necessarily agree with the use of the divine name here, but I'm using the NWT, and so I'm just qualifying my use of it there. But nevertheless, whatever you're doing, work at it whole-souled as to Jehovah or as to the Lord, and not to men. For you know that it is from Jehovah or the Lord you will receive the due reward of the inheritance. Slave for the master, Christ. So, in a spiritual sense, our inheritance is really the gift of life that the Christ gives us. The bread that comes down from heaven, his flesh and his blood, that by partaking of, we receive life. Not only now, but in the future. And that's the real inheritance, right? That's the real life. That's what's most important in life. But we do need possessions. We do need property. So inheritance does have a place. It's something we should consider and think about. And I hope our review of these texts have given you some insight into some things you might consider from the Proverbs, from the Old Testament, and from the New, where it concerns your family and your view of inheritance.